Too little, too late for the Vietnam vets, of course. But this does limit the powers of the president today, at least somewhat. In that, for example, if President Trump wanted to respond to a military incursion in Iraq or Iran, he could respond immediately, but he has to let Congress know within 48 hours of doing that, and he's only given 30 days before he has to come back again, if they give him approval in the first place. So it's a very, very limited kind of idea, which of course every president since then has tried to find some way to work around. But that's a political discussion, not a historical one, at least not for today. So, the Vietnam conflict. What exactly was it? Well, we're not going to get to all of it in what's left of this lecture, but I do need to give you a little bit of it because, of course, it's the background to the Eisenhower, the Kennedy, and the Johnson administrations. Well, the foreground by the time we get to Johnson. Okay? Okay. Vietnam, as many of you know, was called Indochina, halfway between India and China, stopping place. That's why it was such a strategically important place. France had taken it over, then Japan took it in World War II. But here's the funny thing. Once Japan was defeated after World War II, France came back and tried to keep it. The French did not let their colonies go. They wanted to keep them. Then along comes Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh will lead the northern Vietnamese. He's a freedom fighter to them. He's getting rid of the colonial powers, the French colonists who've ruled over them since, the last century in the famous Battle of Dien Bien Phu. In many ways, it's like their Yorktown. 17th parallel will divide North and South Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh will take over in the north, and President Diem will take over in the south. Get to him in just a second. Okay? We, of course, then end up getting involved militarily. We start supporting Diem, but he's not a very nice guy. His family holds all the power. He holds on to wealth. He persecutes the Buddhist majority. He uses torture. In other words, he's not someone that you'd want ruling in your country. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He's not a communist. He's fighting against the communists, so he becomes our friends. This in itself is already a problem for the United States of America. But remember, this is the Cold War. It's a simple time period. Cowboy hats, remember? So we aid the South Vietnamese government. And you can see that already it becomes controversial. Here we have a Buddhist monk literally lighting himself on fire to protest Diem's government. This is long before the protest songs and Kent State and all the others. So clearly, if you're really paying attention, Americans, we're not necessarily backing a nice guy. So this is where we begin some of the cracks in the foundation already. And so the United States military, as I said earlier, will be increased to 16,000 military advisors under Kennedy. The idea of the domino theory is firmly in place. If Vietnam becomes communist, then all of Southeast Asia will become communist. And before you know it, if Southeast Asia and China are communist, before you know it, India will now be communist. So we're applying that domino theory. Remember that all of these people have lived through World War II. They all remember nobody did anything when Hitler took Czechoslovakia. Nobody did anything when Hitler militarized the Rhineland. Nobody did anything until it was too late. We're not going to let it happen this time. That's why we care about some jungle countries, how we start. I'm not going to be the president, Lyndon Johnson says, who saw Southeast Asia go the way China went. I mean, heck, Truman almost lost his presidency when China became communist. Johnson's not going to let that happen to him. So, Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, he is well known by a lot of your parents and grandparents. And later on, kind of proved my point, later on, Robert McNamara, I will admit, he made an awful lot of mistakes during this time period. Hindsight's always 20/20, of course, but at the time, McNamara was behind trying to get the communists out. And then, of course, the Gulf of Tonkin. And I want to show you some pictures. See, this is why I'm lecturing in very tight spaces today. Why I'm staying here, why if I go just one more step this way, I'm off the screen. Why if I go too far forward, you can't really see my head at all. Because I really want to highlight these pictures and the words that you saw earlier. And I want to show you video. There's so much video on the Vietnam War, both in movies and in Hollywood. So you can watch that all you want. Instead, I prefer some pictures because we've got some important scenes I just want to capture. The idea number one, that's jungle fighting. Now, as I said during our discussions on World War II, Vietnam was not the first time we fought in the jungles. But this is exclusively jungle. We are not fighting in Germany where there's cities and highways and airports and factories. There, of course, were cities in Vietnam, but a large percentage of the country was jungle. You had to be just as afraid of being shot by the Vietnamese as you had of waking up with a boa constrictor around you. And so the kind of fighting that Vietnam was, very, very different from World War II. You did not have massive numbers of troops with tanks and planes, you know, a D-Day form of storming the beaches kind of thing. You had small units on search and destroy missions who would literally go from village to village, from house to house, their job finding the enemy. See this picture here? This guy is, he was nicknamed a tunnel rat. He's got a pistol and he's got a flashlight. These guys had quite the scary job, you see. You could be going through the jungle. Usually the units going to the jungle were anywhere from 20 to about 40 guys the most. Looking for your enemy, machine guns out, and then all of a sudden, a North Vietnamese soldier would pop up out of the ground, shoot as many people as he could, disappear, and no one knew where he went. So these tunnel rats' jobs was to go into these tunnels and try to figure out where the tunnels led to. Sometimes these tunnels led to villages, sometimes they led to other tunnels, sometimes they were dead ends. You can imagine what kinds of things would be inside these tunnels. Barely big enough for a man to crawl through. These are all over the area. And so many times he would get to a dead end, sometimes there'd be a cave-in. Sometimes he would arrive in some North Vietnamese village and be taken hostage. Crazy, crazy, crazy kind of fighting. And so if we can't defeat the North Vietnamese because of the jungle, then we need to get rid of the jungle. So we literally would drop things like napalm to attack the jungle itself, to attack the Viet Cong. I'll explain the Viet Cong later on. Attack their structures. Look carefully. You see the houses? I mean, how do you hit those things? Well, just burn the whole thing down was the attitude. And this, of course, led to famous, horrific pictures like this. This is why I want to show you pictures, because this is how your parents learned the war. They would see this on the front page of the paper. Yeah, they would see this. This result of a napalm attack. You can't control napalm. You can't have precision bombing. You just drop the napalm spreads literally like wildfire, and before you know it, some little girl's clothes have been completely burnt off as she runs away from the attack. There was some Navy, use of naval gunners, for example, as they patrolled the boats, as the boats patrolled the rivers, I apologize, patrolling the coast. Navy pilots, for example, would sometimes be the ones dropping these bombs. So the Navy was definitely involved. This was really, the Navy and the Army. Of course, the Air Force. Was the Air Force still part of the Army at that point, or become a separate branch? They become a separate branch at that point. But most importantly, it was a teenager's war. You still drafting? We've had a draft, remember, since we started one way back in 1940. I mean, he's probably your age. These young guys, young Marine here, they're the ones going off. You know, there was a stat, really disturbing stat in Vietnam, that if you were going to die in Vietnam, 90% of the casualties happened in the first 6 months, because there were so many things to learn. So it was a very, very, very different kind of war. You'll notice a soldier here not wearing any kind of a uniform. That's their bunker right there. Officers would take off their insignia because they didn't want to get shot by snipers. It's hot, it's jungle. And the helicopters played a major, 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 major role. Let me explain, okay? Basically, here's what would happen. You go on your search and destroy missions. What are you searching for? You're searching for the enemy. And if you got caught up, you were ambushed, outnumbered, whatever, you had casualties, you'd get on your radio, assuming the radio had not been shot, and you'd call for help. Helicopters would quickly fly in, they would land, you would put your wounded on the helicopter. As you're being shot at, helicopter would lift off. But I want you to see what I'm talking about as far as the challenges here. As you're lifting up, the helicopter gunner is shooting at whoever's shooting at you. Where are they? Yeah, there's Vietnamese shooting up at the helicopters, the pilots, the men on board. You just fire. Couldn't see the enemy, he just was down there somewhere. And so again, you attacked the jungle. This time you attacked it with defoliants. This particular one, Agent Orange, the most famous of all the defoliants, famous for a lot of different reasons. Called Agent Orange, not because it was orange itself, but because the barrels it was kept in. The barrels themselves were orange. Later on, they would find out that Agent Orange causes cancer. Many, many, many Vietnam veterans will get cancer. Of course, many of the people living in Vietnam itself will get cancer. There will be birth defects. All kinds of terrible things will come out of Agent Orange. Why would your grandfather get it? And I want you to really think about this. I have to be very, very careful what I'm saying, because your grandpa may have died of cancer. He may have died 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe recently. Could have been caused by Agent Orange. Why? Okay, so the plane drops all these defoliants down, killing all the jungle. What happens next? Soldiers walk through the jungle. They sit down in the jungle. They put their hands down on dead plants that haven't killed it. Of course the Agent Orange is still around. And unfortunately, it will take many, 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 many years for the government to finally admit that Agent Orange did cause cancer. All kinds of ugly things come out of the story. I am just telling you the very tip of the story. There's so much more to talk about. Take a look here. Kennedy got assassinated right here in 1963. So you can see why Johnson is seen as the president for Vietnam. 1968 is the height of the Johnson administration. U.S. troops, 500,000 by 1968, are going to Vietnam. War has never been declared. The other thing I want you to realize, one of the major, major reasons for the loss in Vietnam, I'll be blunt, was because it was on TV. There were reporters everywhere. It was nicknamed the living room war because you could watch it right there on television from your couch. This is what will play a large role in the protest movement. And in fact, the United States military, when the whole war is over, will look back on Vietnam and they will say the number one reason we lost that war is because we lost support at home. And we lost support at home because of television, because of the reporters. And it was something that they were determined to control in the next war. You know, like Desert Storm or the Gulf War. Desert Storm is the Gulf War. War in Iraq. We're not going to let this happen again, was the U.S. military's take from that. One of the military's biggest challenges was something called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And I've got this kind of faded for you so that you can see that the trail leaves North Vietnam, here really blown up for you, leaves North Vietnam, cuts through Laos and Cambodia, and arrives in different locations in South Vietnam. North Vietnamese troops would leave their country, would cut through 2 other countries, and then arrive all of a sudden in South Vietnam. Realize what a big problem this is, and this will play a major role in Richard Nixon's administration and what Richard Nixon will do to expand the war. It will help cause the Kent State Massacre and so many other things, because the question that everybody has is, well, how do we stop them? I mean, do you invade Laos? No, it's a neutral country. You can't invade Laos. You can't invade Cambodia. You can't invade neutrals. I mean, that's what the Germans did in World War I and II. You can't invade neutrals. But the North Vietnamese are doing this, and they're showing up in South Vietnam. What do we do about it? We'll talk more about that later. How does a country, now we're not there yet, but we're going to be there soon. How does a country that can go to the moon, how does a country that could destroy the world with its nuclear missiles, how does a country with computers and televisions and automobiles and Hollywood and radio and everything else lose to a third world nation? One of the biggest problems we had in winning the war in Vietnam was getting over that idea. I mean, come on! We're the United States of America. Look at our technology. They don't have a chance against us. Makes me think about the mistakes that the British made against Washington all those decades ago. They called it Operation Rolling Thunder. The idea was very straightforward. Carpet bombing. Just bomb and 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 bomb. Bomb them into oblivion. North Vietnam. Went on non-stop for 3 years. Especially, well, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Wait a minute. I thought you said the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a neutral country. Yes, it was. Copper bombing, napalm. I know you can't see all this, but can you see this stat? America dropped 8 times more bombs in Vietnam than all the bombs in World War II. Say that again. We dropped 8 times more bombs on Vietnam than all the bombs in World War II. We lost in Vietnam. Spoiler alert! Vietnam's going to turn communist. South Vietnam will fall. America will leave. I thought we didn't. Well, we'll talk about how you lose and not lose a war when we get to Nixon and Ford, okay? We dropped 8 times as many bombs on this tiny little country than all of World War II. 8 times! And we lost! What the hell? You cannot win a war with an air force. Just an air force. Keep that in mind, any of you military historians or any of you who go into the military, what kinds of mistakes were made in Vietnam. The biggest mistake many would argue was in assuming that the Air Force could just bomb them into oblivion and they just give up. British didn't give up when the Germans were bombing the crap out of them. I hate to sound like I'm some kind of a Monday morning quarterback. I don't know what I would have done if I had been in Vietnam. Let me make it very clear. I have no idea what I would do if I were in the military. What I am telling you are the lessons that the military itself has learned, that they themselves have come back and said, this is nothing that, I'm not some genius that I discovered. This is something that I have read that the military itself has noticed. So while I may sound like a Monday morning quarterback, I'm simply telling you what military experts themselves have said about the war. Okay? So, the enemy was the Viet Cong. Viet Cong, farmers by day, guerrillas at night. They did not always wear uniforms. Actually, they didn't wear uniforms. There's actually two enemies, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army itself. This is another thing that made it so difficult, is you do not know if this was just some kid, or if the kid was part of the Viet Cong and he's going to walk into a group of soldiers and blow up a hand grenade. Oh, and this, of course, Mao Zedong. Remember what Mao Zedong did? Oh, Mao Zedong only took over China using guerrilla war tactics. The guerrilla wins if he does not lose. The conventional army loses if it does not win. That's all Mao had to do, was stay alive in order to win. That's all the North Vietnamese have to do. That's all the Viet Cong have to do, is stay alive. We can't get rid of them. We can't get rid of their desire to be who they want to be. So, again, more pictures. Again, why I'm not showing you video. Pictures like this were seen on the nightly news. That is the chief of police of Saigon openly executing, I'm assuming, the Viet Cong. It didn't matter. He's openly executing somebody. Little children being tied up like this. Now, that child probably, I don't say probably, may have done something that either injured or hurt Americans or even killed American soldiers. We don't know. All we know is that that's the picture that was on the television. And then there's, let me jump ahead for a second. Then there's Tet. This is what will eventually change everything. The Tet Offensive was the North's offensive. And General Westmoreland, the general in charge at the time, just before this, will be saying things like, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Meaning, hey, I think we're going to win this thing. And just as he's saying that, shortly afterwards, in January of 1968, the Tet Offensive, it's only the largest offensive the North Vietnamese Army has done so far, attacking over 100 cities simultaneously with 67,000 troops. It was a massive, massive offensive. They took every major southern city. They did eventually lose. They were eventually beaten back by the United States, but it was very, very clear that this war was nowhere near over. Okay? Yes, the Viet Cong was destroyed. The North Vietnamese Army had been debilitated, but it was quickly rebuilt. And the American media portrayed it as a defeat because it was such a surprise. Even though these are significant military objectives. So you can see the role in the media in the Vietnam War was huge in the perception by the American public. And so the chants and the criticisms began. Hey, LBJ, how many kids did you murder today? Of course, the people who were the most critical of Johnson were the teenagers. Why? Because they were the ones who would be drafted. And other reasons, of course, but that's the most obvious one. And Johnson's popularity in 1968 dropped from 48% all the way down to 36%, one of the lowest popularity rates ever seen. And I want you to kind of put this in perspective. At worst, our current president, President Trump's popularity has never dipped under the 40s. I think off the top of my head, it's always been somewhere between 44 and 48. 36%. And that is why Lyndon Johnson will then make an incredible announcement in 1968. I want you to hear it.
With American sons in the field far away, with America's future under challenge right here at home, with our hopes and the world's hopes for peace and the balance every day, I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country. Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
I want you to realize what Johnson has just done, and this is where we're going to end, because I really want you to just realize the power of this decade, the power of Vietnam. 1968, right? Johnson was elected in 64. Kennedy was shot in 63. Johnson gets elected in 64. So he obviously can run for president in 68. He's only served one term. He is saying, I'm not going to do it. Why am I not going to run for president? Because of Vietnam. I'm too busy. And we all know what's not being said. The real truth is, he'd never win a re-election. Never. Vietnam destroyed Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency. Vietnam erased anything that the Great Society had ever done. It made people forget about the accomplishments of the Civil Rights Act. Lyndon Johnson was this one who signed the Civil Rights Act. It was Lyndon Johnson who puts the feather in the cap of Martin Luther King's movement. No doubt about it. One of the greatest things racially, if not the greatest thing, other than freeing of the slaves, ever done for freedom in America was the Civil Rights Act. Nobody remembers Johnson for that. They only remember Vietnam. So what's the next president going to do? Kennedy's been murdered. Johnson is now quitting. Think about the 60s. Not a single president has finished his term. Kennedy gets murdered. Johnson refuses to run. The guy who was going to run. Bobby gets murdered too. I mean, what could the next president possibly do? How could he get us out of this war? We need somebody to make things right. And who is that somebody? Who is that hero coming over in the nick of time, wearing the white hat against the Reds? There's a little hint. We need somebody who can defeat the Reds. Someone who's done it before. Somebody who knows how to fight them. An experienced anti-communist. Well, I know the greatest anti-communist around, the one we should have chosen the first time. You know who I'm thinking of course, the great, great, great hero who will destroy communism once and for all. We're talking, of course, of Richard Milhous Nixon. Wait, isn't that the Watergate guy? Oh, you have so much to learn. Nixon, next time.